For this demo video, I'm going to show you coil construction. I'm going to start with the base and start with the walls. So you're going to need guide sticks. Make sure that they're the same thickness, so that way that is the thickness of your base. Okay, you're going to want a rolling pin to roll out your slab for your base. This will be the template for my base, and a ball of clay that you've wedged. Okay, so I'm going to start throwing it down. I kind of like to throw it at an angle while flipping it over, so that way I don't get a big mound in the middle. If you just throw it straight down, it tends to make one part really thick and one part really thin. So I'm just throwing it down just enough that it's easier to start rolling it. Okay, so I line up my guide sticks, leave a little bit of space. I have to make sure my rolling pin is actually on my guide sticks. If it's not on my guide sticks, then it defeats the purpose of the guide sticks creating the thickness that I need. Flip it over. So undo a few passes, undo the other side until you get the thickness that you need. Alright, so I'm going to check my template. I know that it fits within that slab piece. Okay. Next thing I want to do is compress my clay with a rib. Doesn't matter if it's a serrated rib or a non-serrated rib. I just like using the metal ones. Make sure it's nice and clean. So I want to make those plates in the clay really, really strong. I don't want to have anything loose, or sometimes like the clay stretches and it can buckle. This will kind of get rid of some of that texture to make sure it's nice and strong. So I'm going to go ahead and angle, not straight up and down. Just kind of sweep it back and forth a couple times and flip it over. I'm going to do both sides. This also gets rid of the canvas texture. It's easier to work with. Alright, so I'm going to grab my needle tool or my fettling knife. I personally like my needle tool just because when it's really plastic clay, the fettling knife tends to stick a little bit more, so it's just my personal preference. Okay, so I'm going to choose my little bit wider side. You can choose the other side, doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to place it. I don't want it right next to the edge. And while I cut, I don't want to cut the complete circle. I'm going to do 1/2. And I'll pull that clay away. And then do the other half. Alright, so then I'll put that into a ball, and I could wedge that back up later. If I don't want to wedge it right now, normally put it in a bag so it doesn't dry out too much. Okay, but I'm going to use this right away. Alright, I'm going to make sure that I have my project on a bat with newspaper so it doesn't get stuck. Okay, so I've wedged my ball of clay. And now I'm going to start squeezing it into like a big brat shape. Kind of a big thick log, just so it's easier to start rolling my coil because it's already kind of in the form or shape that I want. So I'm going to start rolling it back and forth from fingertip to heel of my hand. I'll kind of spread out my fingers as I roll to help stretch the clay. So I'm aiming about the thickness of my thumb while I'm rolling. If it gets a little flat on one side, I'll focus on that area. If it's a little too thick, I'll focus on that spot. If it's too hard to roll it really long, that's okay. You can always cut it in half. Don't feel like you need to do like the whole big long piece. Alright, so it's about the thickness of my thumb. I like to cut off the very ends, or smooth them out at least, just because they have a tendency of making little holes there, and that could become air pockets in the walls of your piece, which can then cause it to crack or break. Alright, so I'm going to take my base. You can use a banding wheel if you want. You don't have to, it just makes it a little bit easier. Okay, so I'm going to score it, or scratch it, break up those particles in the clay. So I'm going to use my serrated rib because it's got the little teeth on it. It goes a lot faster. So scoring, you should be able to see the lines pretty well. And I'm going to score my coil. And I put a little bit of slip. If it's really soft clay, you can just use water, but once it gets a little drier, as you add your coils up and up and up as a couple days go by, then you'll definitely want to use real liquidy slip, which is actual liquid clay. But for right now, just water is fine. Alright, so I'm going to place it on top, not the outside. The outside has a tendency to cause cracks, so by putting it on top, I'll have a nice strong bond. So I'm just going to smooth down that end and start pushing down each coil. You can smooth it as you go, or you can lay it down and then smooth it later. Just make sure you're pushing down a little bit so you don't create gaps between each piece of clay. Alright, and if you have a nice long coil, you can just go right up onto the next level, and that would be fine. Now I have the clay just going straight up on itself. So it's going straight up, it's not going out, it's not going in. If I want it to go out, then I would place it on the outside a little bit. If I want it to go in, I'd place it on the inside. Alright, so I'm going to start smoothing these down. Okay, I'm going to smooth down that edge. I'm going to smooth the inside, so I like to hold my non-dominant hand on the outside, have my dominant hand smoothing with my thumb up and down on the inside. So I like having my hand on the outside because that way I know I'm not distorting it, and I know if I'm pushing too much. And I can actually push a little bit harder because I have that extra support. If you add too much slip, then it's really, really hard to smooth. So it's good just to have a little bit to start with. I'll use the flat side of my rib. The metal one is really nice because it's flexible, and I'll smooth out the edges. So I kind of push down on my coils just to make sure that there's good contact while I'm smoothing it down too. I'll go back with my fingers and smooth that all down. If it's a little messy for a little while, that's okay. You can always go back and smooth stuff out. When it's really soft, sometimes it's just, you're kind of constantly fighting it. Have fun.